This was the closest Saitama ever came to quite literally becoming the greatest threat to humanity. A moment that came within mere seconds of changing the story of One Punch Man forever, in the worst way possible. Since the series has been around, there's been a lingering theory around the community that the final big bad of the series actually won't be God, or the organization, or even the Mad Cyborg. No, some believe that in a crazy turn of events, it'll actually be Saitama who ends up being the final boss that everyone has to team up against. It might seem totally unbelievable and a little crazy, but those who believe this theory would point to a few key moments in the manga and the anime that are apparently proof from one himself actually foreshadowing this inevitable event. The first of which being in the first episode of the anime, where Saitama says that somewhere along the line to becoming strong, he lost an essential part to being human. Another example would be when he first comes face to face with Garo at the beginning of their final fight, where he's so frustrated from everything that's happened that day, his house being destroyed, all the noise kind of annoying him, that he feels like he can just straight up destroy the planet right there and then. This even sends a shiver down Garo's spine. This seems to be an instinctive reaction from someone that can feel Saitama's power, being actually willing and capable of doing what he's saying, destroying the entire planet. Well, aside from that, in my opinion, one might have actually explored the evil Saitama theory and made it a reality for just a moment in one of the most controversial chapters of the entire manga. I'm of course talking about the time travel sequence in chapter 166. Garo pretty much teaches Saitama how to time travel, and in doing so, Saitama is able to travel back to the moment their fight first began and deliver a massive blow that ended the fight before it even started, calling it the Zero Punch. This in turn saved about half of the S-Class and many other heroes and civilians from dying of radiation poisoning, and saved the entire planet from potentially being poisoned by Garo's cosmic radiation. Just as importantly, it also saved Genos from being killed at the hands of Garo, a moment you'll realize by the end of this video is actually much more important than you originally thought. And this is where we get into the big question of this video. What if Saitama never managed to travel back in time and save everyone? What if God had confiscated Garo's power and killed him before he could fully teach Saitama how to manipulate time? Well, I actually think I have the answer, and I'll just say right now, things get really dark really quick. Let's play out the end of Saitama versus Garo again, but this time, like I said, God confiscates Garo's power, he dies before Saitama can travel back in time and save everybody, and Garo just crumbles to dust. This twist in events would mean that all the deaths and all the permanent damage to the planet from the radiation would be irreversible, and Saitama would be left all on his own to pick up the pieces. To fully understand what Saitama's next actions would be, we have to dial in on his state of mind just prior to Garo's death and all of these events happening. In chapter 166, we see Saitama deliver a massive blow to Garo from outer space that plummets them both straight to the surface and essentially puts him down for good. They then have a classic talk no jutsu session at the end of a major fight, and this is when we find out how important Genos truly was to Saitama. He compares his relationship with Genos to that of Garo and Terrio, when Garo claims that he was trying to save Terrio by becoming the absolute evil, but Saitama responds by saying, "Save him? Wasn't he trying to save you?" Garo then snaps back at Saitama, questioning how he could possibly understand their relationship, but soon notices Saitama is looking down at Genos' core, something that he had held onto that entire time. We then see him finally understand Saitama's anguish when he thinks, "Do you know my pain too? No one with such power can remain sane." It's at this moment that we learn why Saitama was gripping onto Genos' core so tightly the entire fight. Saitama was literally gripping onto the last bit of human emotions and connections that he had left in the entire world. Up until that point, Saitama had been slowly feeling more and more disconnected to the world because of his godly strength slowly losing excitement and joy in his life. That was until Genos came in and became something of a best friend and a little brother to Saitama, ironically making this godlike being feel human again while being more cyborg than human himself. Realizing that he needs Genos back before anything, Saitama will do what he can to bring him back, which means bringing his core to the only person in the world that he thinks can repair Genos, Dr. Kuseno. Kuseno would undoubtedly be shocked and devastated by Genos' death and work tirelessly to find a way to use the data recovered from the core to create a new version of Genos. As he works on this, Saitama sticks around his lab, going over what he'll possibly do if Genos can't be brought back and how the world is going to recover from Garo's devastating attacks. In that moment, Blast would appear after realizing that the fight he and his mysterious group deflected to another end of the solar system actually ended back up on Earth, leaving Saitama as the victor. He questions Saitama about what happened, and after being briefed on how desperate the situation is, pleads with Saitama to join him and his galactic team in fighting God and his influence. Being someone that usually strays away from flashy hero stuff and still waiting on Genos' reconstruction, Saitama would refuse. Blast would then press Saitama further by saying that he'll be a danger to the planet if he stays on Earth. Now knowing the events that happened on the moon Io and Jupiter, Blast would be fully aware of how insanely powerful Saitama had become and bring up the fact that him simply catching a cold and sneezing or farting in his sleep or something would mean the complete destruction of the planet. More importantly than that, he needs to stay far away from humans in his current state because getting hit by gamma ray bursts, nuclear fission punches, and being so close to Garo that whole fight means that he's extremely radioactive himself. This means that he would immediately poison anyone around him with lethal levels of radiation. That's when it clicks in Saitama's mind. He's been around Dr. Kuseno this whole time, waiting for him to fix Genos. He rushes over to Kuseno's workspace to find him on the floor, bleeding out of his nose and mouth. He'd already died from Saitama's radiation, forever ruining any chance Saitama had of getting his friend back. After officially losing everything, his home, all of his friends, and his ability to live as a normal human ever again, Saitama loses it and tries to punch the ground in anger. Blast quickly deflects the punch to another dimension or another galaxy with his hyperspace gates, and the diverted punch destroys an entire cluster of stars and even planets. He shows Saitama what he would have just done to the planet Earth from that simple punch and pleads with Saitama again to join his fight against God so that something like this would never happen to another planet or dimension again. After thinking about the fact that the Earth is pretty much toast at this point and the Hero Association would probably be no more after the confirmed deaths of half of the entire S-Class along with many other heroes, Saitama reluctantly would agree. He goes on to battle some more of God's strongest disciples but takes them out easily. He's not messing around anymore. He quickly makes God realize that he has to fight Saitama himself one-on-one, and the battle between Saitama and God finally begins. They have this incredibly epic battle that spans across multiple dimensions and solar systems. I mean, I can only imagine how truly incredible these sequences would look, along with Murata's amazing art style. And throughout the fight, Saitama can't get rid of God in a single punch, but much like his fight with Garo, he grows exponentially stronger to match his opponent. He eventually becomes stronger than God and finishes him off with one final death punch. God is killed, but along the way, Saitama becomes strong enough to learn the ability Garo had tried teaching him before, time travel. Realizing this, Saitama grips onto Genos' core that he'd been holding onto that entire time for safekeeping and immediately uses the ability to travel back in time to the moment his fight with Garo first started. Like he did in the manga, he finishes off Garo before any of the devastating events to come ever happened, saving everybody. The events of the manga play out as they did, where Genos transfers all the data from the second core to his brain and becomes aware of everything that happened. He then says the same thing that he said to Saitama in the manga, this time with an even deeper meaning. The worst came to pass, by which I mean that I and all the other heroes died before your eyes, thereby prompting you to cross space and time to save us. Such a transcendent ability, controlling even the law of causality, is proof of heroism admitting no flaws. What Genos essentially says with this line is that no matter what, you winning is an inevitability. You coming back to save everyone was always going to happen, thus bringing everything back to normal, burying in time the moment that Saitama could have snapped and become the greatest calamity that One Punch Man has ever seen.